Get in, losers. We're learning about capitalism. Uh, so, I've had a couple people ask me about the companies and things that I want to start. And I think that given my other video on what an economy is, that I should start from the basics and explain where I'm planning to go with this. I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from, what my intentions are, and actively kind of look at what the best options are. Now, I'm going to be the first person to tell you that I don't know everything. Okay. I am a software development engineer with 25 years of professional experience. I've worked at startups, I've worked at large enterprises, I've been a engineering director at Fortune 50 companies, and I've actively been blessed to work with billionaires on a daily basis, and I've managed to learn a little bit from a lot of different people, but I am not an expert on those things. As a result, I'm diving into this completely blind and trying to leverage my prior knowledge of foreign exchange markets and my prior finance background and knowledge learned from writing code for Hakanashi charts and things to kind of segue that knowledge from the engineering side to the business development and marketing and profit making side as part of that, as part of a, I don't want to say side hustle, but basically I want to learn what I can to be more centered on the business. And I've always enjoyed working with startups because I got to learn more and be more focused on what the goals of the business were. And so I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the types of capitalism that I want to be a part of because I'm in America, okay? So I'm a part of a capitalist system, even if I don't want to be, which I kind of do because capitalism is the only one that allows me to own personal property. It's the only one that allows me to lift myself up and actually get more. So I'm actually a big fan of capitalism. I'm actually, I can see it's abused. I can see that it's lost its way. I can see that many people corrupt it. And I can see that because of that, there's some people that don't like it. And I can definitely see why. But from my perspective, capitalism is still the best option compared to all the other ones that are out there. Now, there are people who feel like capitalism is bad, and they'll point to something like this. They'll point to this. Uh, they will, talk to this pyramid of capitalist system, which is actually technically Russian propaganda, by the way, uh, because it was from a Russian magazine. So even though all these people who are anti-capitalist are pointing to this, you should know that you're basically parroting Russian BS. But let's look at the actual thing here. Um, so this is actually kind of you know we eat for you, we shoot at you, we fool you, we rule you. Capitalism. This is BS. Okay. The problem is this actually goes back to 1901, 1911, and basically that's when the corruption of capitalism started happening. It was a form of political satire and effectively a political attack against the ideology of capitalism, which in turn corrupted it. So one of the things that you should understand is that there are different capitalism varieties. There's different types. There's profit, how you're getting your profit motive, your precursors to capitalism, and how why those are valuable. And there's different things. Most people talk about capitalism in terms of you're either capitalist or you're socialist. That is not true. In fact, Karl Marx would disagree with you there because he had an even more extreme version where nobody owned anything and somebody could just take your underwear because you didn't have a right to it. Uh, that's even bigger than socialism. That would be communism. And so the big issue there is that if you are kind of looking at the you're looking at the trends and you're looking at the political spectrum that you want to do, you can do radical communism, you can do dictatorships, fascism, socialism, conservatism. These are the political spectrums mapped together based on things like, democracy, dictatorship, left wing, right wing, center, political change, all these fun things. And what you get down to is that if you want to keep the status quo, you're generally an independent or you're on the GOP or Republican side of things, or you're looking into, if you're looking for progressive, that's why they call it progressive. You are a Democrat or you are looking as part of a social change value structure ad. And so the problem here is that Republicans traditionally want big government and they want the government to have control of your life, which is why dictatorship is here. Now, Republicans will say, no, we don't want big government. We want small government. We want to do what we want to do. The problem is, what they want to do is become dictators. And so they see the government as a problem that limits their ability to do that. So they're not trying to get rid of government because they don't want government power over them. They don't want government because they don't want a government that can tell them no, which is a very different thing. And so the end result is that I'm probably not a full Democrat either, because I love the idea of social change, improvements, things getting better slowly over time. But I'm also not into dictatorships either, because if you go that far, go too far on the Democrat side, you will also get a dictatorship, which is something that I don't approve of. And so you have to be in this blue bar here and understand that it is a spectrum. It is not a binary. It is not either or. It is not one or zero. There is a very, very big spectrum here, especially when it comes to capitalism. However, we have forgotten that. And that was because of the socialism and conservatism bias, fascism and communism being their own thing. But because of this ideal of one or the other, we've forgotten about what capitalism actually is. Now, so no, we don't want that. Let's see here. Let's see. Did I actually not have it? Oh, great. Okay. Well, let's just look into this here. Conscientious capitalism. Conscientious capitalism. And so, what I ascribe to is something called conscientious capitalism, or as I'm going to shorthand it, Costco capitalism. The important thing here is it's based on the idea that you, as an entrepreneur, are going to make your profit. But the only reason that's okay is because you're helping people live better lives while you do it. There's a lot of different types of capitalism. There's laissez-faire capitalism, which is basically let the buyer beware, do what you want, it'll all work out in the end because nobody matters. And I don't believe in that either. I believe that conscientious capitalism is probably the only true version of capitalism out there. Now, when you think about the types of capitalism, one of the things that you want to consider is the fact that back as the 1900s or so, there was a giant war around what people wanted and what people thought, and it was the Cold War. Okay, and it ended up into several world wars, but it ultimately came down to what type of capitalism is good or not. And during that, a lot of people, let's just say that they forgot what actual capitalism was. And it was also censored a bit. A lot of people saw these ideas as revolutionary or too in line with the opposition. And so the middle ground of a capitalism where it was okay to make profit and it was ethical to make profit because you were doing the right thing had too much in common with the enemy's idea of no, you can't have profit. You should be helping people. And so the end result is that you are kind of trapped and kind of lost in that because if you tell yourself you're a capitalist and you tell other people you're a capitalist, they're going to assume that you like profit, and that's fine. But if you tell people you're a conscientious capitalist, they're going to look at you and go, wait, there's nuance to that. I don't want to think. I don't want to consider the nuance of this. You must be a socialist masquerading as a capitalist. No, I don't believe that Costco is communist, and I don't believe that Costco is socialist either. I believe it's good business, and so from my perspective, that is where I want to go. The main tenets of conscientious capitalism are having a higher purpose, having a stakeholder orientation, having your leadership be conscientious of the mission, and trying to keep a culture of the company that's conscientious of its goals. Now, part of the problem with the whole conscientious capitalism thing is that companies that have tried to do it have lost their way. For example, Starbucks is a great example of this. They're currently fighting unionization because they got too big. They became a publicly traded company, and after they became a publicly traded company, they became legally obligated to meet certain criteria around profits, which unfortunately doesn't really align with the stated mission of conscientious capitalism. It is my personal opinion that a publicly traded company is by definition not true capitalism under the current definition of a publicly traded company. I believe that it was considered at one point too good, and it was something that actively sought to limit markets and actively sought to make markets smaller with publicly traded companies. And because of that, it was attacked by interests that wanted to corrupt the idea of a publicly traded company solving a problem for everybody, which was its original intent. In fact, if you were to kind of look at this from a software development perspective, we look at individual libraries as solving specific problems for us. We look at, for example, a JavaScript notation library or an XML parsing library as doing the job of one thing for us. And we give that the one task for our work for the entire project, no matter how big the project goes. You have the library that deserializes and serializes things, and that's it. In Rust, we have Serde, which is the library to do that. But from a markets and capitalism perspective, you take that way of thinking and think of companies as libraries to do different types of work. You get eventually to the idea that one company is going to end up doing that job for everybody. It's going to become the most popular library that everybody uses. And so when that happens, we get a monopoly on the business side. But monopolies are not always bad. In fact, if they're done well and they keep to their interest and they don't abuse their monopoly power, they're actually perfectly legal because it's more efficient to have one company do that. Unfortunately, it also creates a lot of problems because now you have a bus error possible, which is a fancy way of saying if something happens to that company, you suddenly don't have any other ability to handle that work. And that library, if it ever dies or gets deleted, just to put it in software terms, suddenly isn't available to anybody anymore. And so it would be the equivalent of a package getting yanked from Node.js or NPM's package repository, for example. And so the end result is that if you are thinking in terms of software and software management for companies, you can consider every company to have a core mission statement and to be doing a specific type of work. And any company that does the same work can also be leveraged to do the same type of work. Now, the thing about conscientious capitalism, is that we want to create a solution that solves a problem and actively makes the market smaller, which is something that publicly traded companies were known for at one point. In fact, there are many innovations and solutions that no longer are needed because the problem got solved. Think of it as, say, we cure polio, we eradicate it from the world. Well, all those companies that make iron lungs are no longer needed anymore. Those people are going to have to go get jobs somewhere else. But thankfully, they'll probably have transferable skills, so it doesn't matter. The important thing, though, is that if some other company comes out of the woodwork and says, no, we're going to invent a new version of polio, and then our stock in a polio company that we want to buy just rose, so we made lots of money, that's kind of became the modern corruption of capitalism. We have a problem where, in America at least, companies seek growth at all costs, even if it's not in the best interest of the market or in the best interest of the consumer. we actively have companies that are more than happy to expand the market and make it bigger by introducing problems. The pharmaceutical companies are actually kind of known for this. They will give you they'll give you a drug and they'll say, yeah, it's got a side effect. You turn blue, but that's okay. We'll sell you this other drug to, turn you purple, and then we'll just use this other thing to cure the purple temporarily. But you have to have a subscription. And that's kind of a good example of their business model in some ways. And so I'm fully on board for drugs that cure the things that make you purple, for example, to use a euphemism. And as a result of that, it's something that you really need to consider when you are out and about and you're thinking about the capitalism from the perspective of, is this good for me, but is it good for the consumer? That is conscientious capitalism. A conscientious capitalist pharmaceutical company would be like, okay, well, this has too many side effects. We're going to make money treating those side effects, but it's better for the market if we just control the fact that we own this thing and don't allow it on the market, except in extremely rare cases where doctors are like, yeah, we need this to help somebody. And as part of that, we'll give them the other stuff for free, or we'll figure out the side effects in a way that isn't going to hurt them or make them have to have a subscription. And so the big issue there is that I see a lot of capitalism as existing only because people have created traps for consumers versus there being a legitimate need. There is not a legitimate need for a lot of the things that are out there. And so, from my perspective, by simply blocking ads and by simply staying away from those things, I don't have those problems in my life. And I'm free to think about things like what type of capitalist do I really want to be? Now, I am all for profit, but I don't believe that taking a customer hostage is the right thing to do. And so, even when I'm considering things like subscription models for software, I feel guilty because I know that's the standard and I know that's what will allow me to pay people and create value at a long scale, solution. But I am so sick of the BS and dark patterns of my industry. And I have been exposed to so much of it that, yeah, I know a lot about those dark patterns. And yeah, I can definitely figure out a way to create a subscription system. I've been, looking up Stripe and dealing with that. But there's a part of me that just is so ashamed by my industry's bad practices. Whether it's live service games or needless subscriptions for features that should just be included. Like those things anger me. They frustrate me. They make me wonder, well, what is our real value? If you're forced to charge people money for something they should just get for free, then where is your real value? Is your value in being a gatekeeper or is your value in being a solution provider? And a lot of times I see people just being a gatekeeper versus instead of being an actual solution provider. So I want to be a solution provider. And if that creates problem for the competition that wants to create problems, then fuck them. I have no problem with absolutely destroying an entire market's ability to operate through disruptive innovation that kills the competition's need for existence while they treat a symptom of a sickness that I'm able to cure. That is how I will operate. And so I'm saying that here because I want it known. I'm not going to give people cold symptoms so I can treat the cold symptoms through a subscription. I refuse. But what I will do is cure the cold. And as the person selling the cold notices that more and more people are immune to it and their market gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, they will get weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And eventually, that market will die. When that happens, I will move on to the next market, or I will have already spun up multiple other projects so that I can do so. Because one of the things that I have to acknowledge that a lot of the people I've worked with who had MBAs have actively refused to consider is that businesses have a life cycle. I've worked with enough startups and mid-sized companies and large global organizations to know better. Okay. Whether it's a division being spun up and spun out and then doing its thing and then being brought back home and killed off, or whatever, like there is a life cycle to everything. And whether it's Taoism or Buddhism or what, you have to understand that there is a way for everything in life. And if you do not work with that in mind, then you will be working against reality. And so I acknowledge also that any product or service that I create or design or work with will eventually no longer have a need. Because at some point, I'm going to be the guy that somebody else disrupts. And if I'm not okay with that, then I shouldn't even try. And I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm okay with my biggest, most profitable thing suddenly not being needed anymore because that problem doesn't exist in the market anymore. I think that's a good thing. I think disruptive innovation is a good thing and I support it. Now, my wallet may disagree, but from my perspective, it's something that is natural and it's a part of humanity and it's a part of life and it's a part of the universe. Cosmic dust settles, stars form, burst into life, gather elements around them, planets form, civilizations are created, the sun explodes suddenly, everything around it dies, and the process repeats itself. Why would I think that I'm any better? And so, from my perspective, I know I don't know everything. And that's another premise that I want to call out. I'm going to do a lot of learning here, and I'm not going to be able to know everything in advance. I can only hope that I can meet up with some really skilled leaders who are willing to mentor me along the way and share what they know so that I can do the same with them and teach them what I know. I don't know who they are going to be, but I'm open to it. And so I need to call that out as well because there's more than one type of capitalism. And I've settled on the one that allows me to feel like I'm still a good person. With that in mind, I'm probably going to end up employing people that don't follow the conscientious capitalism model. They're probably going to be tasked with doing things on the standard capitalism model in order to get things done. What I would love to do is have the money to be able to hire some really like roughneck, hardcore capitalists to work on public service problems. Like here's $1 billion. How would you solve this problem for everybody definitively? How would you do that in a way that completely destroys all competition or need for competition? Why? Because those people are good at thinking like that. And I know if I can leverage that, then who knows? Maybe I can make the world better. Okay, guys, today we're curing cancer. Whatever. I mean, obviously that's a little bit, it's kind of a moonshot goal, right? But I need you to understand that I am going to also be dedicating a percentage or two of, well, I don't know how much it's going to be, but when I get going, I'm going to dedicate a type. I don't know what the number will be, a chunk of the income made by the company for research and development and moonshot projects. I think it's going to be really critically important that we have those being worked on concurrently to everything else. And I believe that they will provide more opportunities through a small in-house research team. I've seen the value of research teams. I've seen the value of letting smart people just here's a problem. Please solve it, and then just getting out of their way. Uh, I've been one of those people that were hired to do that. I've worked, worked at Microsoft Research. I've worked at other large companies, and I've been the guy that got told, "Hey, just solve the problem. We don't care how." Alexa, shut up. And I've completely been in that situation from the perspective of the engineer, and I know how freeing that is, but I also know the value that you can give. Alexa, shut up. Um, but the fact is, I actually I think that's extremely valuable because even when those people are not noodling on a problem and thinking about the big moonshot problems at hand, having that kind of resource available to just throw random questions at is invaluable. And I'm honestly confused by the fact that most companies don't have an in-house engineering team of people like me to ask these kind of questions about too. And so from my perspective, I think that's going to be one of the big resources that I'm going to invest in when the time comes. Obviously, I can't do it now. I'm just getting started. I don't have anything, but that is going to be a thing. Um, and so one of the things that we also need to worry about here is that, let's see, I've gone over different types of capitalism. I've gone over different types of finance. I've gone over different types. So the big issue too is that we can go to capitalism itself is actually pretty. Let's just do this because I want to be able to see this. And the thing about this is that there are many different economic systems at play here. But the let's see here. But if you were to sit here and read this entire thing as I did, you will find that there also seems to be a lot of how can I say this? As I said earlier, there's a lot of talk around the different alternatives to capitalism, but it's always presented as a binary choice. This is, in my mind, a form of gaslighting, and it's a form of attack against the idea of conscientious capitalism. It was effectively a way to make people just accept the worst parts of capitalism, even if that's not the best for humanity. And so I want to make it very clear I support capitalism, but I do believe that the worst parts of it that we see in the market, the parts that get people in trouble, the parts that get people thrown in jail, the parts that have people be scammed, I believe those are the corruptions of capitalism. And so, as part of this, I believe that a profit motive is inherently ethical as long as you are actively doing your best to act as a fiduciary and provide value to the market. Now, a lot of people don't know what a fiduciary is. And from my perspective, it means doing the right thing and acting in the best interest of, for example, like a parent or a trusted uncle or something to that effect. And so the idea there is that you are actively trying to do what you can to deal with supply and demand, but you're also going to provide supply for demand while also doing your best to decrease demand, either through innovation or disruptive economic models that remove the original problem being solved and replace it with a smaller problem or a new problem which by virtue of it being new up levels humanity in some way. For example, if I were to sit here and say, I really hate using these basalt cut rocks to trim my beard. Well, you know what? There's this new invention called a razor. It's a straight razor. You can use a knife to do it instead of this rock, or even better, we have this thing called a straight razor, and you can just get it done. And that's a perfect example of innovation. The corruption there was that they were selling the razors and then trying to put people on a subscription plan for the blades. And so, from my perspective, it would be simpler for us to, as a civilization, take a single blade, use ionized carbon gas to coat it with diamond, take a machine, cut it to sharpness now that it's basically encoded in diamond, and use that and sell that for a lifetime. You only need one or maybe two blades total. So you just sell the set. At that point, it's everything you need. And guess what? They're doing that now. In fact, a lot of the older shaving style, shavers are just you can't replace them anymore because they're replacing them with ones with different blades and things. And it's only a few companies that are like really well entrenched that are refusing to do this because it's a profit motive for them. But there's smaller, nimbler companies that are like, F it. We don't want to have somebody pay for a razor every day. It's stupid. Just buy this product, own it for the rest of your life. You're done. And that's what I like to see. Um, the the fun thing about this, though, is that if you are looking up the history and the different types, um, this is interesting because they don't. They call it humanistic capital. So they're actually adding different versions here. Anti-statist, anarcho-capitalism, the idea of no governments. Community capitalism is an approach to capitalism that places a priority in the well-being and state of the community as a whole. This is probably more like conscientious capitalism. Uh, Unite humanity. I don't know. I think there's some elements of that, but not quite. The neo-capitalism. I don't know. Techno-capitalism. Yeah, it's kind of. I don't know. They haven't really. But from my perspective, free market is important, and we should allow people freedom of choice. With that in mind, I am going to provide a buyout option for some products. Now, one of the things that I really don't like, and the I think one of the bigger issues here is that when it comes to software, which is my main knowledge thing, I still have to worry about paying for the servers to host everything, and that is an ongoing cost. As a result, I'm not against subscriptions entirely, and I think they fit a lot of business models, especially with tech and the need to have servers running constantly, storing data and paying a company a fair wage to provide for that service. But I also don't believe that it is a fundamentally bad thing for me to create subscription services for things that do not require that. I think honestly, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the customer will choose. And if it's not something they want to partake in, they will tell me because I will have options available to let them do so. But it's important in every case, as part of capitalism, that you give people the freedom of choice. That's what it's about. Capitalism is about giving people the freedom of choice to build the life that they want and to have as safe as a life as possible. And so when think about Costco capitalism, for example, I think of it as okay, well, the company makes most of its money from memberships. It provides uh, the cheapest possible costs for everything in its warehouses. It allows it's so cheap, in fact, that a lot of restaurants will literally just buy all their stuff from Costco, make their meals for people, and then just upsell and make profit off of it, selling it to you. And so I think that's kind of interesting. And so what I want to be is also at a layer below the common retail market. I want to be at a place where companies can afford to use the service and then resell it. And so I'm still thinking about all of this, but I'm a capitalist. And I've had a few people make comments on my threads about, being anti-cap, about them being anti-capitalist. And so I need you to understand, I'm not a fan of Marx. He was a poser. He claimed to be somebody that was for the people while doing everything in his power to consolidate his personal power at the expense of the people. And so as a result of that, I just don't believe in socialism or communism because, I mean, there's just so much to say there. Like, if you're a communist, then you're advocating for the ability for people who need glasses to not own their glasses. And if you are a socialist, you're basically saying, look, this person doesn't get glasses because they don't need them. And I'm against that. I prefer the capitalist mindset of, okay, cool. They're able to earn the funds to get their glasses. Give them glasses. Now let's see what they can do now that they can see. But at the same time, I also believe in making it easier for people to buy glasses. And I feel like there should be a central, or at least one central organization whose sole purpose is to make it easier for people to buy glasses. And that's why the whole publicly traded company thing is something that a lot of people get confused about. The only reason publicly traded companies existed originally was so that they could provide common goods and services to the public at scale. It was so that once they went public, they could get the resources they needed to scale out and serve the public good in mass. It was so that this tiny little company that was doing good works, that was making things cheaper, that was providing food for people, whatever, could suddenly get the resources they needed to do that on a wider scale and drive down costs. But the publicly traded company system has corrupted that because that competed with companies too much. When one company went public, all the companies that were not public suddenly had to deal with this giant competitor. And they didn't like that. So they lobbied to change what public companies were. And so at this point, I believe that publicly traded companies are a corruption. And the companies that I start will not have the goal of being publicly traded. In fact, I'm just going to say it. If a company that I'm with becomes publicly traded, I am going to simply leave the company after my shares and everything vest, because from my perspective, there's no point in being a part of a dying company, and every company starts to die after it goes public. It may take a while. They may have a growth spurt before that, but they always end up dying. And I have not seen a modern software startup in the last 10 years really get that popular after going public and not having lots of problems because of the short-term mindsets, because of the problems. Now, I can go back and I can say, "Oh, well, what about Microsoft? They're done great. They're publicly traded. They were founded in 1982, et cetera, et cetera." But you know what? They also got in trouble for being monopolists at one point, and I was a permatemp for a long time too. So I understand that, and I love Microsoft. Like, working for Bill Gates was amazing, and I would gladly do it again. But Bill's not at the company anymore, and wouldn't even bump into Steve Ballmer anymore. Like, do you understand what it was like to work at a company where I would literally bump into Steve Ballmer getting his Mountain Dew, or Diet Mountain Dew as it was, and trying to get out of his way because he's on his phone in one hand and reaching for the Diet Mountain Dew with the other, you know? And so that was an experience, let me tell you. But the important thing here is that the company itself tried to do good, and it's still doing good. It's great that way. But there's also been a lot of consolidation lately, and the layoffs that just hit with Microsoft have a lot of now ex Microsoft people going, "What do we do now?" And I'll tell you, they're not thinking about getting a job at Microsoft. They're thinking about starting their own thing. They're thinking about, what do I do with the rest of my life now that I'm no longer there? And in some ways that's healthy, in some ways it's not. But long story short, I think honestly at the end of the day, this is something that I'm going to have to keep in mind, because I don't want to be left or right of center too much when I create my company. And I think this is something that you should consider as well from a business and leadership perspective. This isn't just political perspective from the perspective of politics and government, because all governments are just larger companies, and companies are just smaller governments, and teams are just smaller companies. They're all subgraphs on the ecosystem graph. And so, one of the things that you should understand is that when we talked about graphs and economies in my prior video, where we talked about how an economy is just a largely acyclic graph, the fact is a government is part of the economy, so it's technically a subgraph. And if you want to get technical, that company is authorized by the government, so it's technically a subgraph of the government. And so as you drill down to the team size of you and your five other people, you realize that you have a subgraph of a subgraph of a subgraph of a subgraph. And so these rules still apply no matter what stage of authority you are, whether you're the lead of a team, the lead of a company, or even the lead of a government. And so maybe I'm biased because I've actually done international politics at scale. I was a big gamer. I still am, but there was one game I played called Eve Online, and I actually ended up being in some of their videos. You can find me, and the end result was that I learned a lot about politics and international relations because I was dealing with hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to live in the same parts of space, had very different ideas about what that meant. And so I had to understand the economics, I had to understand the entire life cycle, recruitment, and everything. And so when I ended up getting trained in actual recruitment for companies later on, I had the guy that gave me the training go, "How do you know all this stuff already?" And I just made the comment, "Well, I'm a big gamer and I do recruitment for guilds and things." And at that point, a light kind of popped up in the guy's head, and he was just like, "Really? Huh?" And we didn't talk about it later on, but I'll tell you what, it was a good experience. It actually helped me. So, looking at this, I the problem with the status quo is that everything stays the same. So if it's bad today, it'll be bad tomorrow, and you're forced to be reactionary because something bad happens and it's new. You have to react to it, and you can't really put yourself in a better spot so that doesn't happen. Okay, and at the same time, social change can be good, but if you do it too much, it's radical. And radical change can be bad as well. In the end, you're fighting dictatorship on both sides. So, to fight communism, to fight fascism, you got to be here. You have to be willing to take from both sides. You have to be willing to learn from both sides. So that's where I'm starting today. If you have comments or questions, please make them below. Thank you.